So that's as far how far my Slovak goes, unfortunately, not more. So since it's about the Chatam Sofer, of course, I would like to start with Chatam Sofer, but I have to say already now, it's this lecture will not only be about the Chatam Sofer and his views actually on Christianity or general culture, because there is, in fact, not that much from the Chatam Sofer himself. But what is actually important, nevertheless, is his basic philosophy on kind of how Judaism should navigate in the modern world and navigate in a non-Jewish society. And that, of course, has a lot of influence because the Chatam Sofer was one of the most influential rabbis in Central or Central Eastern Europe. And therefore, he influenced during his time many students, many disciples who became a generation, 2 generations, 3 generations after him, important rabbis in different places in mostly Central and Eastern Europe, and later actually also, for example, in the US or in Israel after the Shoah. So still today, actually, the Chatam Sofer is one of the big shots, one of the big rabbis, and an important scholar who is still actually referenced all the time, also nowadays in Israel and America and other Jewish centers. The Chatam Sofer was known to be a fierce opponent of Jewish reform. And the question is now, how much did that also influence his approach on general culture and maybe on Christianity? I have to say already, it's actually not so easy. Actually, it's a complex topic, and therefore I will always also give reference to the political situation, to the changes, and also then I will refer to many other rabbis. So don't be surprised that it's actually not only the Chatam Sofer. Now, just a small intro at the beginning about the Chatam Sofer. He was born and raised in Frankfurt in Germany. So there's the connection. I'm also from Frankfurt. So all the good rabbis come from Frankfurt, obviously. And there he actually learned already as a young boy from famous rabbis, Rabbi Adler, Rabbi Horowitz. And those 2 rabbis actually were very conservative traditionalists. So I think there is an influence on his way of thinking, which was kind of unusual in Germany, because later on we'll see their overall thinking of German Orthodoxy was definitely much more progressive than that of Eastern Europe. And kind of, in a way, Pressburg, Bratislava, Pozsony at that time was actually in the way in between a little more liberal approach in West Germany and Western Europe, and a more traditional stance in Eastern Europe. Now, he was already at the age of Bar Mitzvah, with 13 years, he was already giving lectures. So you can see he was really a genius. He was a true Wunderkind. And he was later also a very charismatic person. So it was not only about what he was saying or what he was writing. Actually, during his lifetime, he didn't publish much. It was later his students who published his works. But it was that he was an absolute leader and a charismatic personality. And he was really drawing people close. After Frankfurt, in a relatively young age, he was going to Mainz, which is not far from Frankfurt, obviously. And he was learning with Rabbi Scheuer there. And then already he came to the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the late 1700s, 1782 until 1797. He had different rabbinic position in southern Moravia. So he was coming kind of closer already to Bratislava. Then his first real bigger position was his appointment in 1797 as rabbi of Mattersdorf. Mattersdorf is one of the Sheva Kehilot, one of the 7 communities of the Burgenland, which is today Austria, but it used to be actually Hungary at that time. an important part of Hungarian Jewry, and he founded there a yeshiva, which also became famous and also brought actually famous disciples. One of his students there became later a very important rabbi in Ungvar. And then finally in 1806, he was appointed chief rabbi of Pressburg, as it was called actually at that time. So Bratislava is kind of in the bracket. It's a little difficult because if I speak in that time, I will speak about Bratislava. It's actually either Pressburg or it's actually Posonie. So it's actually on the edge between Austria and Hungary, and not a real Slovak city, at least not from the Jewish perspective, because the Jews, when the Chatam Sofera was coming there, they either spoke German or Yiddish. So that was actually the cultural background of the Jews of Pressburg, Bratislava. And then later, actually, especially after the Ausgleich, after the compromise, it became Hungarian. And then also the Jews quickly actually acculturated more to the Hungarian culture. But that's another story. I come back to that later. He headed the famous Pressburg yeshiva. Sometimes it's said he founded it, but there was already a yeshiva, but he really reformed it massively, changed it, and made it really famous, so that indeed Pressburg became one of the centers of Judaism in Central Europe. And this yeshiva was maybe the most distinguished in Central Europe also. There are actually also even to the Pressburg yeshiva and family connections, but that's another story. Now, in order to see where he stands, actually, I would like to bring up another rabbi. So before I speak about the position of the Chatam Sofer, I want to speak about Rabbi Elazar Flekeles. He was a native of Prague and was first also a rabbi in Moravia, and then he became, in his native hometown, rabbi and Dayan. Dayan is a rabbinic judge in Prague from 1780 until his death in 1862. So he was a contemporary of the Chatam Sofer. And so when the Chatam Sofer was in Moravia and when he was coming to Bratislava, he knew, of course, Rav Flekeles' position on Christianity and on the general society. And Rav Flekeles was actually quite open-minded. You have to know that he had good connections also to the Christian society in Prague. He even he had audiences, private audiences at the emperor, at the Austrian emperor. So he was very open-minded and had good connections with Christianity. So in one of his works, in his introduction, he writes the following: "And know that a member of the nations who accepts the commandments of God is entitled to a portion in the world to come, and furthermore, he is giving the title Chassid, a pious one. Therefore, the matter is as clear as the sun that the nations of our time who observe the Noahide laws will receive a portion in the world to come and are entitled to be called Chassidim." So it means the Christians actually, those are the nations of our time he speaks about, they are actually Chassidim. So they are really pious people, they are religious people, and they also are not only equal in this world, but they also have a share in the world to come. So even in the afterworld, they are equal to us. And certainly everything that has to do with idol worship in the Talmud or in the other texts, those are actually ancient pagan groups, but that has nothing to do with Christianity. But he even goes further. He says at the end of his introduction, even with respect to those who do not know God, maybe he speaks about secular people. We must think about it. It was written around 1800. It's the time of the Enlightenment. It's the time after the revolution in France, and it's actually a time that is challenging to the religions, and religions are actually contested, and it seems actually that faith vanishes away. And he says, even with respects who do not know God, it is the best to request divine compassion on them, that they may repent for their ways, and then all residents of the earth will speak one language and have unity of purpose to call in harmony upon the name of the living God, the King of the world, and to worship him in unity. So it's interesting. Flecker's vision is really a true, I would say probably in Christian terms, ecumene of mankind. Each one, of course, has its own religion that we should not misunderstand. He doesn't speak about one religion, but he speaks about worshiping God in unity. There's, of course, one God, one living God for all of us. So he's very universal in his understanding. And now you would be surprised because the Chatam Sofera has quite opposing positions to that. First of all, it's probably interesting to see that his slogan, I mean, of course, it's also a little reduced. His top slogan is Chadash Asur min HaTorah. Anything new is forbidden by the Torah. So things shall not be changed. The Jewish religion and tradition shall not be changed. And this is his basic answer to this political situation I was speaking about the Enlightenment, about the challenges on religion, about the emancipation, which starts now of Jews. So, of course, also the beginning of a reform movement within Judaism, changing things in Judaism. And he says, in times that there is at least potentially equality between Jews and Christians, and a perspective that Jews will at some point get emancipation and rights. That was not yet at this time, but he understood that there is an influence from outside, from the general society, and he sees it actually as negative. He says it as problematic. His view was really that general culture might undermine the tradition and approach to Judaism, might undermine Torah of the traditional understanding, and therefore he says we should keep on what we have. We shall not change things. And moreover, he actually also says there are not many quotes about Christianity, actually explicitly Christianity at Chatam Sofera's work, but there where he gives a clear reference to Christians and Christianity, it is not very positive. He says it is obvious that there, meaning Christian worship, is outright avodah zarah. It is idol worship. So why is that? What is his problem? His main problem is actually the Trinity, which he actually understands as going away from the strict monotheism of the Jewish understanding. So he quotes actually also the Rambam, Maimonides, for example, who had a very strict approach on monotheism, on the unity of God, and who was opposing anything, either the Trinity, setting anything beside God, and the understanding of like maybe also making pictures or anything. You know, he was very strict in that. And the Chatam Sofera specifically quotes him and takes him out. And the Trinity is for him, in fact, that was actually avodah zarah, means also literally, namely foreign service. It's a foreign service. Now, another quote here is regarding the worshippers of the Trinity, Zi Shar Ephraim, Mel Tzedakah, and Pri Meganim. All of forbid actually Trinity and Shituf. Shituf is a concept that actually practically since modern times, already it started in the Middle Ages, but at least in the modern times, basically all rabbis said that yes, Trinity is not the monotheism for us Jews, but non-Jews actually can attach something to our monotheistic understanding, and this is actually called shituf, to add something to the understanding that we have. So it is okay for Christians to have that. So therefore, of course, Christianity is monotheism in their understanding and their terms. It's not for us, but for non-Jews, it is absolutely permissible. And he kind of takes the only three rabbis out of, I don't know how many, who do actually have a different opinion about it. So is the question, does that mean that the Chatam Sofer is against Christianity and is against general culture? What is his problem? And now, if we look a little more on other parts where he actually speaks about relations of Jews and non-Jews, meaning specifically also Jews and Christians, we will see that suddenly he does not actually go according to his own ruling here. Because, for example, there is a question in tax and financial matters on how Jews shall deal with non-Jews, with Christians, specifically Christians in Pressburg, in Bratislava. And he quotes Rabbi Konitz. Rabbi Konitz is actually a rabbi in Buda and Pest. And we'll see what actually he thinks about Christianity. And he bases himself also, his opinion with regard to Christianity on Rabbi Konitz in a responsum, in actually different responsa. And that is very interesting because it shows that actually if Christianity, if he would really consider Christianity idol worship, then that would not be possible, because actually Rabbi Konitz has a very positive approach on Christianity and allows all these things. And also with that actually in the practical thing. So kind of one is the overall, I would say, ideology where he says, no, Christians are not good. The general culture is not good, but by the way, dealing with Christians in the practical realm, that's okay. So it's kind of ambivalent. It's not really consistent in that sense. He also, for example, permitted in Jewish documents, such as the get, the writ of divorce, that you use a non-Jewish name. So these are actually all things which show that certain things in general culture, which he usually doesn't like, he actually accepts at the end of the day in practical thing. So unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into all these details, but what it shows is, for him, at the end of the day, is not Christianity. His problem that he sees are twofold: secular culture and Reform Judaism. So it is not the religion that he is afraid from Christian society. It's not the Christian part of Christian society, but it's actually the secularization, the relativation, the sentiments against religion in general and against Judaism specifically, that actually with what he actually has the problem. And that's why he sees the danger. He thinks actually that through general culture, Jews are drawn away from their tradition and their religious thinking. And since for him, religious identity and general Jewish identity are in fact one, you cannot put it kind of, take it out and split it. Therefore, it's so important for him to keep that religious part. That's why he is also such an opponent of Reform Judaism. The Reform Judaism he thinks he's critical of is, in his understanding, a Judaism that is kind of Judaism without the religion. So it's Judaism, but it's not really with Jewish content. It's a Judaism that it's only outside Jewish, but inside actually it's only assimilated to the general society and drawing from that. So in that sense, you can see already that there is, in a way, that he doesn't really have a problem with Christianity. Christianity is only a symbol for him for Christian society, for the non-Jewish society. But in fact, one could argue that actually Christianity and Judaism in that sense are on the same side, because also Christianity at that time was, of course, challenged by secularization and all these things, enlightenment, science versus faith belief and so on. Now, I said I wanted to quote also, or give one quote of Rabbi Konitz. who again is also in Hungary at the time. Again, Pressburg, Pozsony was at that time part of the Hungarian Empire. And we can see that, so he's an important rabbi in Buda and the Dayan, rabbinical judge in Pest. And then he says, one who does not accept idolatry and believes that there is God in heaven and is in our religion called a Jew like us. They, the Christians, fulfilled and took upon themselves many precepts. They sanctified our written Torah and also respect the works of our oral Torah. They recognize and know that man transcends the animals, for one God created us and we are all exalted beings. Again, a very universal position. So you can see it's very interesting. The contrast also in a way to Chatam Sofer. Now, let's go a generation later to Rabbi Moses Schick, the Maharam Schick. He is the foremost disciple of Chatam Sofer. So he's very important because he basically continues after the Chatam Sofer with the work and the ideology of the Chatam Sofer. And now again, one might say, if we just read things like the first quote, it seems he continues exactly like what the Chatam Sofer outlined. It says there, and now that the weight of the exile has lightened and Jews are not ridiculed by the nations, they are changing their names and their language in order to make themselves like the non-Jews. And we can apply to them the biblical verse that they are a vile generation. So he actually sees the acculturation and assimilation very negatively. But then again, we have to look very carefully. Is this against Christianity? Not really. He speaks actually that changing the names and the language, making themselves like non-Jews. He doesn't say anything critical about the non-Jews or about Christianity. He just says if Jews get away from Judaism and become like the non-Jews, that's his problem. And you can see this specifically in several responsa. From the first point, from the first look at it, it seems that it's anti-Christian, and it says that that they are maybe in the concept of idol worship. We can see, for example, about the marriage, what he rules about marriage. He says, for example, it's forbidden, that's the kind of second quote here, it's forbidden to make a marriage canopy in a synagogue. So we don't marry in a synagogue, we marry outside a synagogue. Why are we not allowed to marry in a synagogue? Because of the tenet, you shall not go in their statues. So it's actually a principle that we shall not do what the non-Jews do. But this is actually from the Talmudic time. It's specifically for idol worshippers. So it seems actually that we shall not marry in a synagogue because Christians marry in a church, and therefore we shall not marry in the synagogue, but outside as it's the typical Jewish tradition, as we have always done it, in order to do it in another way, because the Christians are idol worshippers. But if you look further on what he said, you will see he's not speaking about the Christians. He's actually speaking about somebody else. And that is that he, for example, said a Jew must wear a kittel at the wedding. The kittel is a typical, it's a white garment, a linen garment that the grooms wear on their wedding. And by the way, this is nothing that Christians do. So if he forbids, or on the contrary, if he says this is mandatory for Jewish grooms to wear on a Jewish wedding, you can see in all these things, he doesn't speak about Christians. He speaks about the Reformed Jews. He says, if the Reformed Jews copy the Christians, if they copy that they marry now in the synagogue as Christians marry in a church, if, for example, within the church, there is now an organ, or inside the church, the bima, where the Torah is written, is not in the center anymore of the synagogue, but it's at the front of the synagogue, like the altar in a church, that is all foreign service. This is idol worship, he says. But not, he doesn't mean the Christians. He doesn't mean Christianity, is it? He says actually that the Jews who do that do foreign service. They do something foreign. They don't keep to their tradition. So that's very important to distinguish, that there is not the problem with Christian practice, religious practice. They shall do it as Christians do. He has the problem with when Jews copy Christian practice, because they say it's two distinguished religions. So of course we can be in relations with Christians, but we shall not kind of make a symbiosis or a syncretism out of the religions. That is it. So he is definitely against the Reformed Jews. So if you will, the enemy, let's call it, the opponent are the Reformed Jews, not the Christians. And you can see it expressed in some other quotes. For example, he says, it's the question, are we allowed to have treaties with idolaters? Is that allowed? And he says, he comments, it seems further that even if there were a prohibition to enter into treaties with idolaters, this would only apply to other nations, but in the state and kingdom in which we reside, in which they protect us, and we are commanded by God through the prophet Jeremiah, seek out the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you. That's from Jeremiah 29:7. And we have been made to swear in the name of God, and we are bound by this through the force of a mitzvah, of a commandment of God. It is incumbent upon us not to deceive or to be traitorous with them, for they protect us. So there you can see, of course, we can make treaties with the Christian societies in which we live, and we are not allowed to be traitors to them. We are not allowed to deceive them. We are not allowed to betray them in any way. Why? Because that is actually mandatory from the Tanakh, from the prophet Jeremiah. So this is a mitzvah, a commandment from God. And why is that? Because the idolaters, were those in the past, but now we are actually in a state and in a kingdom that protect us even, and accept us. So of course we also show our loyalty to that kingdom. And there you can see there is a switch. It's one generation after Chatama Sofera, but while the Chatama Sofera was still kind of seeing the general culture as the first and foremost enemy in that sense, modernity, the change. This is not the problem of Maramshik. For him, it is actually that he's still, of course, suspicious of some of the modern developments. Certainly, he's hesitant, but he doesn't have a problem actually with the general culture or with the government. On the contrary, they are actually those who protect us. In fact, actually, especially can't show it here, but later you will see it also that they show great patriotic loyalty, especially to the royal court, meaning to the Emperor of Austria. Why? Because the Emperor of Austria himself is actually very hesitant when it comes to reform. He is actually very conservative. He's a pious Catholic and is against the reform movement within Christianity. And so that is actually a good example. So as much as the Catholic Church or the Roman Emperor is against Christian reform, that's the way, from his perspective, we are against Jewish reform. So the Jewish reform, that is now the foremost enemy, and not Christianity, not general culture, not the state. Actually, this is, in fact, our allies and not our enemies. Now, his son, actually, Joseph Schick, from Schick, his son, one generation later, he actually goes even a step further. He says that the Jewish people got the Torah, that other nations benefit from the example of the Jewish people. So it's actually not for the benefit of the Jewish people, but for the whole world. And there is a mission, and this mission of the Jewish people was not carried out properly while it was in the Holy Land. And that's why actually God exiled them. And that's why Jews actually live outside the Israel, spread amongst the different nations in order to spread God's word and really to be a light upon the nations. And through the exile that is actually possible, and to bring the message of God to the four corners of the world. That is actually a direct quote from him. So a very universalist approach. And it's a question, where does that come from? And I can show you it comes from this man. At that time here, he was a rabbi in Oldenburg, and he was a young man. And that actually, the first quote I have from him is actually from that time when he was a rabbi in Oldenburg in the 1830s. Later, he was actually also a rabbi in Frankfurt. That was for a very long time, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the first and foremost most influential rabbi in Germany, and the founder of the modern Jewish orthodoxy. He called it the neo-orthodoxy. And so he wrote in 1836 in one of his works, the 19 Letters, the following. And I think that actually Joseph Schick, he read this work. That's the influence on his paper. So you can see 1-2 generations after the Chatama Sofera, they are also influenced here from the German big rabbis and thinkers. And says here, but whosoever thinks that our isolation, our Jewish isolation, is the result of pride or of hostility to our fellow beings, is the victim of a deplorable delusion. Is not God the loving Father of all human beings? Is not Israel unceasing duty to proclaim through the example of its life and history him as the universal Lord and sovereign? The Bible terms Israel segula. That means like a special treasure, something special. But this designation does not imply, as some has falsely interpreted, that Israel has a monopoly of the divine love and favor, but on the contrary, that God has the sole and exclusive claim to Israel's service. Israel's most cherished ideal is that of universal brotherhood of mankind. All nations that were or are anywhere upon the surface of the earth, each with its success and failures, its virtues and vices, its wisdom and folly, the rise and its fall, all these efforts and actions are bricks contributed to the edifice of human history. All tend to carrying out of the plan of the one same God. So I think I don't have to say too much about this. Very universal. He says actually basically, if we are the chosen people, it does not mean we are chosen because we are something better, or that we are special in that way, but it's on the contrary, we are the first servant actually for God. And that is actually our mission, because our isolation is not out of hostility. We want to have actually the brotherhood of all mankind. That is the goal of Judaism. And he says, we don't have the monopoly on God's love. All peoples have God's love. And all the peoples who were and are, with all their mistakes maybe, but still they build on the same building. They still build on the way of carrying out the plan of the one same God. I think it's amazing what Rabbi Hirsch says here already in the 1830s. In his later writings in the 1880s, so 50 years later, a little bit more mature, Rabbi Hirsch has an article about the Talmud and how the Talmud approaches general society. And he says the following: the Talmud obliges its confessors to love their fatherland, to promote its well-being, and to fulfill all the duties of loyal subjects and citizens to the royal family, authorities, and fellow residents. Non-Jews who recognize the God of heaven and earth taught by the Bible, and who fulfill all general human duties such as prohibition of murder, theft, etc., are according to the teachings of the Talmud with regard to the duties between man and man on exactly the same level as Jews. They have a claim to the benefit of all the duties, not only of justice, but also of active human brotherly love. Just to put it until here, what he says is the non-Jews who we live amongst, it's not only that we are loyal kind of to the government and to the country, but we are also we really feel brotherhood with all the other citizens here. Why? Because they also accept the Bible. They also fulfill these rules like not murdering, not stealing, and so on. So therefore, they are the same. They are equal to us on an equal level. But he says, therefore, they have the claim of the benefit of justice. So that means, for example, if they are poor non-Jews, we also have to support poor non-Jews, not only poor Jews in the societies we live in. But he goes even a step further and he says, they also have the claim of active human brotherly love. So they can expect that we actively seek the brotherhood of Christians. And then he continues and says, I just wanted to emphasize, I think it's very important. And then he continues, in general, the sages of the Talmud are probably the only teachers of a religion who do not say, outside of our faith, there is no salvation. Rather, they teach that the righteous of all peoples have a share in the world to come. So that means the Jewish basic theological line, and we've heard it now a few times, is there is religious pluralism. There is more than one valid way to God and one valid religion. And we don't say, and the sages of the Talmud didn't say, you have to become Jewish and only then you will have salvation. No, be as a Christian, a good Christian, and be as a Jew, a good Jew, and then each of you will actually come to the world to come. You know, all will have the same share. That is the vision, actually. Now there is also another rabbi I want to bring in, Rabbi David Zvi Hoffman, who has actually also connection to Slovakia, because he was the rector of the Orthodox Rabbinical Seminary in Berlin, but he was originally from Verbau at that time, and the German name, but it's Vrbové in Slovakia, so it's not far away actually from Bratislava. I hope Vrbové is half correctly pronounced, that you understand it. So he spoke about the Shulchan Aruch, meaning the code of Jewish law, with regard to other faiths. It's like it's a huge thing. It's nearly like a systematic theology of Christians and other faiths. And right at the end, it's a long treatise, but right at the end, he writes the following, kind of in the conclusion part. He says, these laws of Avodah Zarah. Remember, the Chatam Sofera said Christianity is Avodah Zarah. And he says these laws of Avodah Zarah only apply to the barbarian pagans, but the civilized Christians and Mohammedans, the Muslims, we should treat in the same way as the Israelites. This view gradually became the sole ruling in Judaism. Whether some later rabbis considered Christians to be idolatrous is completely irrelevant to Judaism. Halachically, meaning from the point of Jewish law, it is as authoritative as the fact that in some medieval rabbinical writings, Austria is named the land of blood. And yet today, every Jew has the warmest sympathies for Austria and the Austrian royal dynasty. The Austria of today is not the Austria of then, and the judgment of the Jews about today Christians should not differ by a hair's breadth from that of the medieval Christians. Whoever wants to believe this can do that. We do not believe it. So I think, first of all, it's clear that he said, sure, Christians are equals and they are not idol worshippers. That was in the past. And that is not important if somebody quotes it somewhere or whatever, because they're also mentioning in the medieval time as Austria as the land of blood, because there were pogroms against Jews. But, and that is important, the Christians of today are not the Christians of the Middle Ages. And meaning also the Christian, that is actually, let's say, this concept is something which is also important for us, because we can say also the Christians now are not the Christians as, for example, in that time or earlier. So he opens actually with that concept a possibility to say the way how we react to Christianity is, as the minority, also of course depend on the majority It depends on actually how Christians and the general Christian society treats us. And therefore, if in his time, the Christian society actually protects Jews and give them citizenship and rights, therefore, of course, we have a different view on Christianity than we had in the Middle Ages, when actually Jews were actually were in ghettos and they didn't have rights, and they were persecuted. So that's a different story. Now, I want to go to this fall. It's the rabbinical decision at Michalovitz, or the Michalovce, in 1866. That is actually a meeting, an assembly of various Orthodox rabbis, very strict Orthodox rabbis, and this decision there, actually, they kind of define what is orthodoxy, what is Jewish orthodoxy, and that is seen as the founding moment of ultra-orthodoxy, of really the very hardcore conservative traditionalists within the orthodoxy of Judaism. And yet, they say a lot of things actually against the Reformed Jews, but yet they have also the following quote in there: "The obligation of gratefulness toward one's host country applies even to the states which persecute Jews, and all the more so to these nations among whom we dwell, whose inhabitants are upstanding, kind, and just people, and they are at peace with us, and do not cause us to neglect the observance of our Torah and our religion." So I think it's very interesting, because on the one hand, it very much goes compatible with what, for example, Rabbi Hirsch and Rabbi Hoffman in Germany were actually having and teaching also as the Jewish thought and the Jewish understanding on general society and Christianity. But it also shows that things change, because here now Jews really have the chance to be equal citizens, and they understand it, they see it. And although they are actually hesitant with a lot of things about modernity and changes, but they nevertheless embrace general culture and the general society, at least to a certain extent, and they are absolutely loyal to the government and to the countries in which they live, also because they know they actually they are good people, they protect us, and they do not cause us to neglect the observance of our religion and our Torah. And that is the important thing, because the Chatam Sofer was thinking the general society might actually draw us away from Torah and religion. But here actually, especially then after the Ausgleich, after the compromise between Austria and Hungary, the Hungarian government very much supported actually the Jewry and the independence and autonomy in religious matters of the Jewish communities. In fact, actually, many Jews then embraced the Hungarian culture. They became part of the Magyarization. Why? Because they were actually thinking that the Magyar, the Hungarian culture, was not yet really fully established, because beforehand in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was actually the Austrian, the German culture in that sense, that had the monopoly and was the dominant culture. And kind of the Hungarian society and the Hungarian culture was just established, and Jews actually have part in establishing it. So Jews are actually helping creating, in a way, also Hungarian culture. And therefore, it should not be, should not surprise us that actually then also the ultra-Orthodox rabbis were positive about the Hungarian culture, specifically Rabbi Avram Shmuel Binyamin Sofer, the Ktav Sofer, that's his name. He was the son of the Chatam Sofer, and he was the chief rabbi of Pressburg, then Poshonye. And he actually said in 1868, this here in a document in Shomrei Hadat, he says, our goal is to strengthen and endorse the pure and beautiful Hungarian language and support those who invest in spreading it among the people of our religion. So the son of the Khatam Sofer actually kind of turns here, since you can see that the things have changed. He actually now very much endorses and embraces Hungarian culture, Hungarian language. And so while his father actually was against non-Jewish languages and thought it's better actually to keep with Yiddish, for example. So that is the heritage, nevertheless, of the Khatam Sofer, because it's still his ideology holds and also brought to different generations that nevertheless, within a few decades, most Orthodox Jews did become thoroughly patriotic, did identify with their homeland, speaking the local language, and attending state-certified schools. So not only the Neolog, the Reform movements, but also the Orthodox Jews. And this is especially true for the bigger centers in Hungary, like Bratislava, Pozsony at that time, and also, for example, Budapest and other cities. There are maybe in Eastern Hungary, there were some exceptions, but that is here the rule and not the exceptions. And many Orthodox Jews also entered the middle class. So they really became integrated into society. And Orthodox Jews acculturated to a certain point, while holding fast to their beliefs and to Torah and religion, as the Ktav Sofer, the son of the Khatam Sofer, put it. And then, and this is now the last sentence, and then I would like to finish my lecture. In 1919, now that actually Bratislava is Bratislava and not anymore Pozsony after the First World War, and it becomes a city in the newly established Czechoslovakia. Now that the Orthodox are actually cut off from the central office in Budapest, where of course the kind of the association of the Orthodox communities was built, a number of prominent rabbis in Slovakia formed the Central Bureau of Slovak Orthodox Congregation in Bratislava. And that is also a heritage of the Khatam Sofer, that he made it possible. He laid the foundations, and you might be surprised that it doesn't say Central Bureau of the Czechoslovak Orthodox congregations, which might be in Prague. No, the Czechs were unorganized. They didn't have that. But the Hungarian Jewry had its organization and it's within the Jewish Orthodox community. And therefore also they established it actually in 1990, specifically for the Slovak part of the then Czechoslovakia. And that was actually the foundation of Slovak Orthodox Judaism, unfortunately not for such a long time, only until it was then destroyed during the Shoah, during the Nazi time. Good. Until here, then I would like to get the micro back to either Maros or Milos.